Hi there, welcome to another episode of Python tutorial for beginners. In this video, we are going to talk about while loop. If you watched my previous videos, you must recall that in Python there are two ways to create loops. You can either use a for loop or a while loop. We have already shown in this previous video extensively about when and how to use a for loop. If you need a refresher regarding the for loop, click on the link provided at the top right or in the description down below. In this video, we will do similar tutorial regarding a while loop. Before starting with example of while loop implementation, I want to note that your support means a lot to me. Making more contents like this video is possible only when we have viewers and subscribers like you. So thank you for watching and supporting my previous videos. If you like these contents, please like, share, subscribe, and add your comments below to show your support. Now, a loop is basically a block of code that iterates a number of times. So why do we need a while loop if we already know a for loop? To answer this, let's understand the difference between while loop and a for loop. When we have a block of code that needs to be repeated a fixed number of times, then a for loop is implemented. In other words, for loop is a finite loop that iterates for a known number of times before it stops. On the other hand, a while loop iterates until a stop condition is met. In other words, if we need our code to be repeated while exit condition has not been reached, we will use a while loop. A typical example is a game loop that keeps running for hours or days until the user wants to exit. With that, let's see some example on how while loop are implemented. The syntax of a while loop in Python is simple. So we just begin with a while statement and assign a condition with a semicolon there. And in the next line, we write statements with indentation before that. So condition is the test expression that is checked before the statements are executed, similar to the case of a for loop. Statements, in this case, can be any executable line of code. It could be a simple print statement or a mathematical expression to do some calculations. It could also be a function call, a bunch of statements, or another while loop as well. A colon at the end and an indentation in the statement line separate the body of the loop. Let's see a simple example of while loop using a Boolean data type. So instead of saying while condition, I would say while true, and in my statement, I would just write a print statement, something like this. So all I'm going to do is print namaste. Now syntactically, there's nothing wrong with this code here. It will run with no errors, as you can see, but there's one problem. The loop runs forever. So we have to stop this with a force stop. There's no stopping because while loop by nature are designed to run based on stopping condition. As long as the condition is true, as was in this case here, when we said while equals while true, the while loop will execute the print statement repetitively. Therefore, we must be careful when using while loop because of the possibility that we never get to the exit condition. This example is same as when we say, for example, when we assign a variable, let's for example say done equals false, instead of assigning a true in the loop, and then while not done, we would print this statement. And again, when we run this, it will run forever because we haven't set an exit condition, or the while loop never reaches the exit condition. So it keeps on running the print statement forever. While loop doesn't always have to be used with a Boolean data type. So we could also use integer and say, let's say a counter is 0 value, which becomes an integer data type. And instead of this, we say while the counter is, let's say, less than 10, we'll print, instead of printing a string, we'll just print the counter or its value. And when we run this code, just like in the previous example, the counter value is 0, and while this is less than 10, as long as the counter value remains less than 10, it keeps on printing counter, or the value of the counter, which happens to be 0 all the time because we never set a statement that changes the value of the counter to anything equal or more than 10. So as long as the counter is under 10, it keeps printing the counter value within the while loop, and we again have to force exit this while loop. So as you imagine, we need some kind of logic to change the value of the counter in our while loop. One way to do that would be to increment or decrement counter at each iteration. So let's say counter, we want to increment this time, say counter equals to counter plus 1. Now this is not the ideal situation. It breaks the while loop eventually, but instead of running from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, yeah, the print is showing 0 to 9 instead. So if we wanted to print 1 through 10 instead of 0 to 9, we might have to play around with the counter statement and put it before the print statement. So in this case, we increment the counter value first and then print. So it would increment to 1 at the start and then print that 1, and then go back to the loop again and increment to 2 and then print 2. So when we run this, we get the correct output values ranging from 1 through 10. This while loop, just like in case of a for loop, could be rewritten in a single line. Typically, programmers do that when they only have one statement under or within the while loop body. So in my case, I have two statements here, but regardless, I could still put the whole while loop in a single line, and my statements in that case would have to be separated by a semicolon. So my while till the colon sign would still be the same, and then everything, all the statements would be separated by semicolon. And when I run this, again, I get the same output. So this clearly shows that while loop still functions correctly, even if we put the statement blocks under a single line. Let's go back to the previous version, and I want to show you another example. So here I am incrementing the value of counter. And oftentimes when programming, we need to decrement or count down the values down to certain lower threshold until the while loop stops. So let's say, for example, uh, instead of counter, I would say count down, and my upper limit, I would start from 10. So this would run all the way down to 0. All my counters would be replaced with countdown. So while countdown is now greater than 0, I don't need this increment statement. I would print countdown, and then in this case, I would have to decrement the countdown every time my while loop iterates. So minus equals 1. So what this is saying is, after each iteration of while loop, my countdown value would be decremented by 1. So countdown equals to countdown minus 1 is what this is saying. And if I run this, I'm starting my while loop from 10, and every iteration I'm going minus 1. So my countdown starts from 10 and I'm going all the way down to 1. While loops can also be used over a list of values. So let's say in this example, in my list, I have different types of values. I have a zero value, positive floating number, and a negative integer, as well as a string value here. So I want to write a while loop that loops over each item in this my list and prints every item at each iteration. So for that, I would need some kind of counter that indexes over each index value of the item here. So let's say that variable name is index, and I would start at index value 0, which is the first value here, or the first item in this list. And then what I would write, while this index is less than the total number of items in this my list. So for that, I would link length function. So that would be my while loop statement. While my index value is less than the total length of this, so I will be running from beginning, which is the 0 value, until the length of the list is reached. And for each iteration, what I want to do is I want to print my list, and not the whole list, but that index value, or what's in that index value of the list. And obviously, I need some kind of way to increment the index number after each iteration. So how I would do that is increment index value after each iteration by 1. So let's run this. So yeah, so what I had was 0, 3.1 testing string, and a -1 value under my list. And with each iteration of this while loop, finding out each item from that list each time the while loop iterates. Next thing I want to show is demonstrate how a while loop can be used to do or to get similar outcome that we could do with a for loop. So for this, if you recall in one of my previous videos, I had a for loop to print out a table of 2, a multiplication table of 2. So what I had here was I had a sequence that was ranging from 1 through 10, and I used a for loop for each item in that sequence. I was printing 2 times that number or the item as and the final product was a multiplication table of 2 from 1 through 10. Now, chances are if we are doing or if we are able to do this with a for loop, we can also do the similar output with a for loop. So for that, I would keep this print statement, but I would get rid of my for loop and my sequence or the range, and write a while loop instead of the for loop, and I would have to use the item while item is less than equal to 10, but I need to define the item now. So let's say item starts at 1. Item starts at 1, and then while item is less than or equal to 10, I'll print this statement. Now, again, to avoid the infinite loop, I would have to uh, have some way to increment or change the value of item for it to reach that exit condition. So with each iteration, I would be changing the value of item here. Again, +1 after each iteration. And when I run this, I would get similar table that I used or that I obtained when I used for loop. One example I want to show you is how to program nested while loop to produce multiplication tables of several numbers, similar to the nested for loop example. So what we had here on the screen is we produced a multiplication table of 2. So our number is always constant 2 here, and then we are looping through values 1 through 10 to produce this multiplication number. And it would be interesting to also use something similar uh, to try nested while loop and print, instead of just a single table, print several tables that runs through several iterations like this. So just to show the output correctly on the screen without any hiccups, I want to reduce the size of the table. So let's say I want to print, let's say 1 through 3 for each, or 1 through 5 for each table, and I would print all of that inside my another outer while loop. So let's say another while loop here, and everything here goes inside that while loop. So I need another, similar to item, I need another variable to work with or to iterate through in the outer loop. So let's say multiplier, and let's set that to less than or equal to 3. So I want 3 tables, and every table should be running from a multiplication 1 through 5. Now it's giving me warning here because I haven't set the value for multiplier, just like I have 1 here for item. And I could take care of that with just saying multiplier equals to 1. So multiplier and item both start at 1 in the beginning. The outer loop is looping through values of multiplier 1, 2, and 3. The inner while loop is looping through item value 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. To show the output correctly, I would have to change this statement a little bit here. So instead of always saying 2 times, I would say multiplier times item equals, instead of 2, multiplier times item, the product. And I would keep this. Now I can run this and see what happens, just to show you. It's going through infinite loop because my multiplier starts at 1 and I'm checking that multiplier. As long as it is under 3, it keeps running the while loop. So I need some kind of counter to take care of that. This counter here takes care of this while loop, but I need another counter to take care of this outer while loop. So I need to take care of incrementing multiplier value after each iteration of this outer while loop. So that would therefore go outside this while loop and not have the same indentation that these two statements have. And again, this would be increment of 1 at each time. And just to separate the tables, I would also add another print statement, which basically will be a blank line. So after each iteration of multiplier value, I would enter a blank line, basically saying a table of 1 that runs through 1 through 5, and then a blank line, and then table of 2. So let's run this and see. So here's our output. I have a table of 1 that runs through 1 through 3, 4, 5, then a blank line, and a table of 2 that also runs through 1 to 5, then another blank line, and then similar table of 3. So that's all for this video. Just to recap, in this video we talked about while loop and their use cases to compare them against for loop. As we can see in this flowchart, for loop runs for a fixed number of times or known number of iterations, but a while loop runs for unknown iterations until the stop condition is met. So when we enter while loop, it checks whether the condition is true, and if the condition for a while loop is true, it executes the body or the statements within the while loop and goes back into the while loop again. As long as the condition is true, it would keep running the statements. When the condition reaches false, then it exits the while loop. Although the two loops are different, we showed a few examples on how the while loop can also be used to get same output that we got from a for loop. Hope you like this video. Please stay tuned and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also, add your comments on what you think about the contents of this video. Thank you for watching.